Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. Hopefully you were able to join our OK What Now HR webinar last week. We have one more in the series next week, so make sure you sign up for the marketing webinar. Today is the finance and analytics presentation, where we will be discussing how to manage staffing pressures and raising costs while continuing to grow revenue and increase profitability. We'll be covering wage pressures such as sign-on bonuses, higher salaries, and support staff raises. Also, how to grow revenue through fee adjustments, shifts in revenue categories, and customer compliance. And we will finish up with client retention rate, how to calculate it, and why it is important to track. Just so you know, this presentation is being recorded, so you will be able to watch it again if you need to. Also, if you have a question or want to follow the questions that other people ask, just click that voice bubble with a question mark on it in the panel to open up the Q&A. An analytics manager will be monitoring this Q&A and answering your questions live. As we heard in Tamisha's HR webinar last week, there are lots of changes to the job market, and vet med is not the only industry being affected. It is difficult to find qualified employees, and the wages for the employees you do find are much higher than they used to be. The job market is very different than it was 10 years ago or even 2 years ago. New DVMs are coming out of school expecting high salaries, and everyone is so desperate for a DVM that they're able to get the salary that they're asking for most of the time. In addition to higher salaries, health insurance, retirement, CE, and healthy PTO all have become more standard in the veterinary industry now. The best way to approach this drastic change in the job market is to keep an open mind and accept that this is how it is now and is not looking to change in the near future. So we need to learn how to evolve with these changes. It is really difficult to even find any candidates for your open DVM positions, but one way to attract more candidates is to offer a sign-on bonus. Sign-on bonuses. The range for sign-on bonuses is vast, and it's very dependent on your region. We strongly recommend looking at your competitors' job postings and keeping your ear to the ground to hear what competition in your area is offering. It is really important to note that the majority of the time, this is not a true sign-on bonus that's paid up front, but instead a retention bonus. Here's a schedule guide of just what we've been seeing for paying out these bonuses. Typically paid out either at the end of the year or quarterly. Again, all of this varies, but we hope that this is a helpful starting point for you. The fact that these are actually retention bonuses is actually great news for you, since you can be more competitive with the bonus, since it's often paid out over 1 to 3 years instead of all up front. For example, a $60,000 bonus over 2 years is $30,000 per year. If you have average demand, a new DVM could be bringing in at least $500,000 in annual revenue. So are you willing to pay $30,000 in the bonus to increase your top line revenue by $500,000 each year? Well, can you afford a sign-on bonus? Sign-on bonuses, like I said, are highly situational and depend on your practice. And that was just an example, but I want to encourage you to look at it from the perspective of how much money is left on the table if I don't get another DVM. In most places, demand is really high right now, and there is business out there for you to take. So do you have high demand? What are your new client numbers? Are you having to turn away new clients? If so, then these new clients are looking elsewhere, and your competition is growing their active client population. Are you scheduled out more than 2 weeks? If so, is this affecting your active client population as they start to look elsewhere? If any of these are the case, then an additional DVM at your practice could conservatively increase your revenue by $500,000 per year and allow you to grow with this new demand. So assuming $500,000 for an additional additional revenue for a new doctor that's working 4 days a week, then not hiring this DVM candidate is $2,400 of missed revenue each day. So in other words, this DVM is going to pay off their sign-on retention bonus pretty quickly. On the other side of this, if you're not maxed out at capacity and could handle a lot more transactions right now, then there are other things to look into, like your local market and competition, your own customer service, and your marketing efforts. You'll want to understand why you aren't at capacity right now and find a way to get there. Handling higher DVM compensation. So in terms of hiring an additional DVM, are you really at capacity right now? January and February are seasonally slower months, and compared to the high volume of last year, it may feel way slower than it actually is. I've had clients worry about being so slow at the start of this year, but actually they had the busiest January ever. It just felt much slower because of how busy they were during 2021. Also, COVID has had a big impact on how busy practices have been in the short term, the last 2 months. But what I'm referring to is the longer term transactional growth. So please check your actual transaction numbers and don't just base this off of how busy it feels, because what feels normal has changed a lot recently. So that's my disclaimer, to actually look at your numbers. A good DVM in average demand market that's on a base plus production compensation package will pay off their salary and any bonuses. In general, the math works if we are growing. So in summary, if you're a growing practice and come across the DVM that is a good fit, don't force a DVM that's not a good fit, but if you find one that is a good fit for your practice, then it would be wise to do what you can to make it work. I know it can be really tough to swallow the higher salaries and bonuses, but really, what are you waiting for? There's not going to be another DVM later that's asking for significantly less. If anything, they're going to be asking for more, and it may be many months before you find another good candidate. For anyone who might have missed the beginning of this presentation, it is being recorded, so you'll be able to watch it again. Also remember, if you have a question or want to follow the live Q&A, just click that voice bubble with a question mark on it in the panel to open that up. The impact of support staff raises. Okay, so we've covered DVM compensation and the sign-on retention bonuses. Now what about your current staff and their increased wage pressures? Support staff shortages and wages have also been impacted. Many of our clients are concerned about the financial effect of providing raises. We firmly believe in paying the proper wages that will retain good staff. So we have a tool that we use to walk our clients through to see the impact any raises would have on the practice's profitability. We gather all the parameters from the practice and calculate how much revenue is needed to cover these raises and increase labor expense. So here's an example with a brief summary from the results of the tool that we use. This is just the summary main takeaway from it, but I'll walk you through this example here. So let's say we have a $2 million revenue generating practice that's wanting to give $1 to $2 raises. So a current support staff of 14 people results in labor costs at $852,000. Labor wages with the payroll taxes is 42% of total revenue. All other costs and expenses for the practice are $789,000. So this results currently in a EBITDA or operational profit of 18.9% of total revenue, or $382,000. So that's the baseline. So now if we give $1 raises to half the staff and a $2 raise to the other half of the staff to stay competitive in the market, then we can see that our total labor costs increase $46,000. So we need to have 3.8% of revenue growth, or $76,000 of additional revenue to cover these raises and to keep our EBITDA profitability the same. So that's kind of how we use this tool to kind of gauge what additional revenue is needed to cover these raises. And the main takeaway from this example here is that $1 to $2 raises is not going to sink the ship, but we still need to adjust and cover these increases. Right now, it's extremely important to retain good staff and handle the wage pressures before you lose anyone. So let's say your numbers show that you're at capacity, you're looking for another DVM with a sign-on bonus that you're offering, but haven't found another DVM yet, and your staff is needing raises. So what can you do to grow this revenue, this 3.8%, to cover these raises? Well, there's three main things we recommend, and we'll talk about each of these in more detail. Fee increases are very important. That's the first one, especially right now, very important, but that's only one aspect. You also want to make sure that you're focusing on a healthy revenue mix between all the services and inventory you sell. Third, you can examine and improve your customer compliance by looking at where you're being successful. Like I said, we'll talk about each of those in more detail right now. So first, how to increase fees. Much has changed in the market with supply and demand the last few years. Inflation is 7% right now. Wage pressures are increasing. Your costs are increasing so much, we need to make sure that we're being fair to the practice. We need to find that balance between being price sensitive to your customers and running a healthy business. So the vast majority of practices that we've seen who have increased fees recently are seeing little to no customer pushback, even with aggressive fee increases. This just indicates the shift of supply and demand of the industry right now. If your costs are going up a minimum of 6%, then you need to make sure your fees for those things are increasing at least 6% as well. Utilize your practice management system's auto margin adjustments. Make sure that those in your system are up to date, so they'll make the adjustments for you automatically when you enter your updated costs. You'll also want to make the time to review the markups for each of your revenue categories, and make sure you're not just increasing the dollar amounts that your costs are increasing, but by the percentage. So if your costs were to increase something like $10, use the percentage increase to increase your fee instead of just increasing your price by $10 as well. If you don't do that, it is going to add up and it will affect your profitability. So we've been seeing aggressive increases in shoppable items as well. We highly recommend making sure you're in tune with your local market right now. So your prices are a signal to the community of the quality of service you provide. I'm not saying your prices should be the most expensive in the area, but if the quality of your service is above average, then your services should also be priced above average as well. That's how we like to look at it. So now these increases that I mentioned here already should be on top of your annual fee increases to your services. You'll want to be doing annual increases to keep up with inflation every year. This is extremely important right now with this year, with the high inflation rates that we're seeing. So you'll want to make sure that your annual increase this year is higher than the typical 3%. Now is the time to adjust your fees since everyone else is doing it right now and your costs are increasing as well. So adjust to the market, protect your margins, review the markups, and be fair to your practice. Revenue mix shifts. When we talk about revenue mix shifts, we're looking at what percentage of your revenue is being generated by each revenue category. For our hospitals in 2021, for example, we are seeing that about 22.3% of total revenue is being generated by the lab and imaging category. So across the industry, we're continuing to see a shift away from inventory-based items and towards diagnostics and services. Online competition is a main factor in this shift, of course. And this shift, though, is not necessarily a bad thing. Diagnostics and services are more profitable than selling inventory items. We don't want to completely let go of pharmacy and inventory, that side of things, but we should be asking, how do we expand exams? How do we expand procedures? How do we kind of start the shift towards our services? So we're going to lose the retail battle in the long run due to online competition. So let's not try to drop our prices and try to compete with Chewy. Instead, we want to recommend we recommend holding on to your margins and start adjusting your focus on the services that Chewy cannot compete with. Increasing customer compliance. So let's say you look at your practice's revenue mix and you want to improve and grow a category like lab. Two things to ask yourself. How are we recommending, and are our customers taking our recommendations? So how are we recommending? Are we being consistent as a team internally? Make sure that your philosophy of practicing medicine is being reflected by your whole team. Consistency in this is very important. So what's your hospital standard of medicine? Do you have policies for what to recommend, when? If so, then see if this is consistently being followed across your team. Now, the other side of this, are the customers taking the recommendations or are they passing on them? If customer compliance is low, how are we presenting the recommendations? Are we focusing on education and explaining the whys? If we have one doctor that is great at getting lab work, what is that doctor doing differently? And how do we replicate that in our other doctors? So tap into the experts that you have in your building, learn from them, and try to implement what they are doing that results in successful recommendations. We recommend having regular meetings with your DVMs to discuss this data. We even have built various tools to monitor and track compliance that can help guide these conversations that you should be having with your doctors. Client retention. With how hectic everything has been in the past 2 years, we want to make sure we are keeping a close eye on our client retention rates. Some practices might be facing retention issues with their current active customer population if they're prioritizing their new clients too much. However, you also want to be accepting new clients if at all possible right now. So it's a tough balance to find. But if you're booked out several weeks and are unable to fit your existing customers in, then they may start looking elsewhere. If we need a new doctor, but are too busy to make the time to put out ads and interview, or if we're waiting for a candidate at a lower price, then when we do find a DVM, the active client population may have suffered and decreased too much to really capture all the potential growth there when the new DVM starts. So this is why tracking client retention is really important and an important thing for you to be in tune with your business. So how do we calculate client retention for, let's say, 2021? That's my example here. So first of all, you want to find your active clients within the last 2 years. An active client is going to be a customer with at least one transaction in the last 24 months. So in this example, it would be any customer with a transaction between the dates of January 2020 and December 2021. You're going to take that active population and then subtract all the new clients that you gained in the last 12 months. We subtract them out since we're wanting to look at only our baseline clients before these new clients came on this year. So we subtract the new clients for the year out, and then we take that number and we divide it by the active customers in the prior 24 months. So in this case, any customer with at least one transaction between January 2019 and December 2020. Now that's going to give us our client retention rate. Ideally, we want this to be meeting 80%. Typically, we've been seeing our clients around 85%, but please take some time to see where your retention rate is. And then, is your retention rate changing This is something that you can track. And if it dips below that 80%, then we highly recommend looking into why there is attrition with your customers. A few things that might be negatively impacting your retention rate is customer service, poor customer service, ineffective reminders, and then again, an inability to fit everyone into the schedule. It's important to identify what's happening if there are any changes to your client retention rate, and then make the necessary changes to get it back to the levels you're comfortable with. It's very likely that looking at your retention rate could point to the importance, again, of hiring another DVM if your retention rates are lowering due to scheduling issues. So another common issue many practices faced this past year when they were booked out for several weeks were cancellations. It seemed like many customers were scheduling appointments at multiple clinics and then taking whoever could get them in, and then no showing the other practices. We have several practices who are able to mitigate these last-minute cancellations and no-shows by implementing an appointment or surgery deposit fee. Maybe this is something to consider if you're also facing detrimental cancellations. Despite a rapidly evolving industry in the past 2 years, we're still seeing hospitals improve year over year with revenue and profitability as they adapt to the new challenges that have been presented. Again, this presentation was recorded, so you can go back and watch this again. If you have any questions or would like any further information, please feel free to reach out to us on our website on the camp contact page. But the main things I want to leave with you are, if you're growing, be willing to give a sign-on bonus to lock in that great DVM candidate. Give appropriate raises to retain your staff. It's very important right now. Adjust your fees to maintain your profitability despite your rising costs. Embrace the shift from inventory items to your services where Chewy cannot compete with you. Look at the data with your DVMs and learn from their expertise on how to improve compliance. And then calculate your client retention rates and monitor it for any major changes. Please join us again next week. Jess will be talking about how to market your practice to clients if you're not currently at capacity, and how to attract new potential hires to handle growth. But there will also be an important focus on how to retain your current customers and keep client retention rates high, like I was just mentioning. So as well as how to continue revenue growth when you do not have capacity to take on new clients. So this webinar, the marketing webinar, will take place next Thursday, the 24th at 11 a.m. Pacific and 2 p.m. Eastern time. Hope you're able to join us then. Thank you for attending today.